Casey Neistat, about a year ago, did an awesome video, and it's titled Sisyphus and the Impossible Dream. And it's all about his journey to run a sub 3-hour marathon. And it was absolutely awesome. Such a great, inspirational video. But he got something wrong, and I want to talk about it. The myth of Sisyphus is a Greek myth, and it tells the story of a man who was cursed by the gods to roll a boulder up a mountain, only to allow it to roll down to the bottom of the mountain, and his curse was to repeat that task every day for eternity. In his video, Casey Neistat compares this curse of Sisyphus to roll the boulder up the mountain. He compares that to his 24 attempts to break a sub 3-hour marathon and his failure each time. Each time he talks about one of the marathons that he's run in the past, there's a little animation that the video shows of a caricature of Sisyphus rolling a boulder up a mountain and then his failure, and then the boulder rolls back down and he goes down and repeats. But on his 25th attempt, Casey Neistat succeeds and he runs a 2:57. And in that moment in the video, that animation of Sisyphus, you see him roll the boulder up and over the mountain. And while that makes for a great video, that's not what happens to Sisyphus. Now, I'm not here to tear down that video by any means. I actually really liked that video. Casey took a creative liberty, modified the myth, and made a beautiful story out of it. And to be honest, that's the great thing about myths. They're just stories, they're not historical fact. And there's no one true interpretation of myths. That's what makes them so powerful sometimes. But for me, the myth of Sisyphus is about so much more than chasing and achieving goals. It's about the concept of absurdity. And if Sisyphus were to achieve his goal, if he were to roll that boulder up the mountain and it didn't roll back down and he won, he did it, then the moral of this myth, the meaning behind it, would be completely lost for me. Now, most of what I get from this myth comes from a book I read, and it's called The Myth of Sisyphus, and it's written by a French philosopher named Albert Camus. And in this book, he talks about how we live a life that is absurd. And by absurd, I mean it lacks meaning. Camus makes the argument that all of the stories that we tell ourselves to make meaning of this life are just lies and delusions that we use to make ourselves feel better. And that's kind of dark, but the famous line from this book is that we must picture Sisyphus happy. So how can a person that is cursed to do an absolutely meaningless task over and over for eternity, how can that person be happy? And why should we care about this myth? Well, Camus has his answer, and it's one that resonates very deeply with me and many other people. I am absolutely freezing, so I'm going to try and hurry and get through the rest of this before I freeze. So, first, why should we care? Many of us, myself included, see ourselves in Sisyphus. We are in a massive meaning crisis today. Anthropologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, they all agree. The meaning-making machines that we have used for thousands of years have begun to fail us. Our daily routines have become like Sisyphus' boulder, an endless treadmill of alarm clocks, commutes, fluorescent lit offices, and mindless scrolling on our screens, only to wake up and repeat it all again in a cycle that feels as inescapable as a prison sentence. We've crafted a modern existence where even our leisure time is commodified and regimented, leaving us trapped in artificial rhythms that drain our spirits. And then we repeat that cycle, roughly the same cycle, every day until one day we die. And then in less than 100 years, our names in our lives will be completely forgotten. To me, that sounds a whole lot like the curse of Sisyphus. And so that's why you should care. But I know that a lot of you watching this video have stories that you tell yourselves that allow you to make meaning out of life, out of this repetition and this rhythm that you're in. And it doesn't feel artificial or meaningless to you. And I will never try and take that away. But for the purpose of trying to understand this myth and the people that identify with Sisyphus, pretend for a moment that you do not have that meaning-making story. As I mentioned earlier, Camus makes the argument that the stories we tell ourselves to make meaning out of this life are just lies and delusions to make ourselves feel better. And I'm not going to go that far to say that he's right, but he makes the case that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, and we must do that by embracing the absurdity of life. It is through embracing the absurd that Sisyphus transforms his burden into his freedom. His rock becomes his thing, his fate becomes his triumph, precisely because he accepts it while remaining clear-headed about its fundamental futility. Once Sisyphus embraces the pointlessness of pushing the rock up the hill forever, his task becomes his own choice, and he becomes free. And we can do the same thing with our lives and our daily struggles by facing them with clear eyes and embracing the absurdity of life. And I know for a lot of you that this whole myth, this whole idea might not speak to you. But for me, it spoke to me on a very deep level because for the last 7-8 years, a good chunk of that time was spent in a state of mind called nihilism. I made a whole video on that. You can go watch that if you're interested. But what I found was that absurdity is the cure to nihilism. And in embracing the absurdity of life, I have been able to find joy in it again. So, anyways, if this was thought-provoking or interesting to you, or if you also find meaning in the myth of Sisyphus in a different way, I'd love to hear about it. So, anyways, stick around. I'll catch you in the next video.